Hello, Brobs. It's ill-advised to start another book while I've already got about 15 in progress, but I want to read this book and I'm tired of waiting. There's a few other books like A Midsummer's Night's Dream and Gothic Images of Race in 19th Century Britain, but I believe those, or at least the latter one, will probably be tagged for copyright violation. The Golem Remembered. I'm trying to show you the jacket because without the mylar sleeve on it, since it's putting a huge glare on there, since I'm in a basement at night. But let's read the jacket information. In 1580, according to legend, Rabbi Judah Bezalel Lowell of Prague, a famous scholar of the Kabbalah, created the man from clay, a golem, in order to protect the Jewish community from the blood libel and pogroms. In this fascinating volume, Arnold L. Goldsmith outlines the subsequent literary career of the Golem of Prague, analyzing his evolution in the most important 20th century versions of the Golem legend available in English. Goldsmith ranges from Rabbi Udall Rosenberg's publication in 1909 of a collection of stories allegedly based on an eyewitness account of Rabbi Lowell's act of creation to the American Abraham Rothberg's thoroughly modern novel, The Sword of the Golem. He summarizes the major developments in the characters and incidents of the legend, suggesting how and why they were reshaped in response to the varying interests and motives of their tellers. The final chapter surveys the Golem in his most recent guises in poetry, films, short stories, and even comic books, providing abundant evidence that the Golem is, even today, far from dead. Goldsmith was educated at Boston University, etc., etc. He was part of the Wayne State faculty in Detroit for about 40 years. Almost 40 years. I think it was exactly 39. In this book, I am concerned with a single golem, the most famous one in modern times, the prototype of most of the golemim in 20th century literature, the incredible Golem of Prague. This strange creature sometimes appears as an ominous, slant-eyed, clean-shaven, bald man in a shapeless gray coat. His face half hidden in darkness. Sometimes he looms 10 feet tall, wearing a huge wig like an inverted wing nut, framing his square face, 5-pointed amulet fastened to his massive chest. Others see him as a white-bearded, mummy-like figure with a green Hebrew letter drawn on his stony forehead. He has even appeared in the shape of a goggle-eyed robot made of gleaming brass nuts, bolts, wheels, and valves. The form changes, but the appeal of the Golem in this century to the imagination of artists and their audience is undeniable. There's also it's signed by him, and it's to the congregation of Beth Shalom, which I believe is in West Bloomfield, Michigan. And I think he was part of that synagogue or whatever. I don't really know what the congregation Beth Shalom is, but he had a paper there in 2000, I think, which was shortly before his death. I will read this. I have been asked to express an opinion about why the myth of the Golem, an artificial man created among other instances to defend the Jews of Prague in the 16th century, has interested so many creative people in the past and continues to do so even in our epoch of science and technology. In the Yiddish tradition, I will answer the question with a question. Why shouldn't this legend have influenced and intrigued creative minds? It possesses the tension and the suspense of the supernatural. It is based on a faith almost as old as the human species, namely that dead matter is not really dead, but can be brought to life. I am not exaggerating when I say that the Golem story appears less obsolete today than it seemed 100 years ago. What are the computers and robots of our time, if not golems? Isaac, or is it Isaac? I'm not sure how you. Bashevis Singer, Forward to Golem, Danger, Deliverance, and Art. If robots can do men's work better and more cheaply, then what will men do? They will be retrained for other things. The robot makers answer, but by whom and for what? Almost 20 years ago, Kurt Vonnegut's Player Piano portrayed a future society in which the elite few run the machines while the unemployable majority subsists on handouts and resentful idleness. It's an enormous problem, concedes Luigi Lazzaroni, president of the Italian firm that makes the Prague robot. Many will have to learn how to work differently. The schools, industrial firms, and the government must cooperate to ensure that the workers are able to fit the requirements of industry. The mystery of where do we come from and where do we go has always fascinated thinking men. As human control over the forces of nature grew and man became increasingly conscious of his latent powers, he began to speculate about his own capacity to equal and to oppose the demi-urge. I'm guessing that means urges, but it could be ergos of creation. Like all peoples, Jews too were intrigued by the idea of creation. Alien to all tenets of rationalistic Judaism, even sacrilegious in opposing itself to God, Jewish folklore nevertheless boasts a number of legends in which man superseded God as creator. An astonishing piece of impudence from the pious, but breathtaking in its sheer daring. Nathaniel Ausubel, Introductory Note to the Golem of Prague. The middle of the 17th century was a cataclysmic period for the Jewish people of Europe. It marked the most dreadful massacres of Jews in history, of course, excepting those by the Nazis in World War II. The terrible ravages of the 30 Years' War and the revolt of the Cossacks under Bogdan Khmelnytsky against Polish rule left the Jews of Europe frightfully decimated and shattered. This was immediately followed by the Messianic fevers, which tortured and racked the spirits of those Jews who survived the bloody Holocaust and finally left them disenchanted. Darkness and superstition descended on the Jewish ghetto as it never had before. Nowhere could Jews themselves cope with the problems of their survival. God, it seemed to them, had abandoned them to the sword and the persecution of the enemy without, and to the seduction and betrayal of the messianic swindlers within, such as the Messiah of Smyrna, Sabate Zevi. So in its despair, the folk mind, fed by the sickly Kabbalistic dreams and myths current at the time, created the magical figure of the Golem to protect the Jews' puny weakness with his enormous physical strength. To discover by means of his supernatural powers the plotters against their peace and thus foil their wished plans. It was the Golem, as redeemed, that viewed... I can't see, what does that say? I don't know what this is. Blank. The historical frame of reference of the tormented Jewish life in the 17th century in Europe lends some haunting poignancy. Nathan Ausubel. Regardless of any potential medical advancements, human dignity must not be degraded by having life created in a laboratory dish just to have it thrown out with the trash when scientists are finished with their Frankenstein-type experiments. Representative Robert Dornan. All right, that's interesting enough. To Rabbi David and Alicia Nelson, who have contributed so much to Congregation Beth Shalom, which plays an important part in the writing of this book. Best wishes, Arnold. That was 1981. The Golem Remembered, Variations of a Jewish Legend by Arnold L. Goldsmith, Wayne State University, 1981. I'll hold this there if you want to enlarge the screen and read it, but I'm not going to read all these names. Pause and enlarge if you must. To Glad, who taught me to love my heritage. Contents broken up into 7 chapters, 142 pages with bibliographic commentary, selected bibliography, illustrations, preface, introduction. Preface. In the last few years, as I have lectured on the subject of the Golem to synagogue and college audiences, I have frequently been asked 3 questions. Is there more than one Golem? Do you really believe that the Golem existed? How did you get started on such an unusual subject? The answer to the first question, which will be discussed in full in the introduction, is yes. There is more than one Golem. The second question continues to amaze me, even though I am convinced that we are dealing with legend, not fact. Many people in this modern age of reason, science, and advanced technology still believe in the supernatural and mystical. If legends are repeated often enough, there will always be listeners who believe in them. The third question is a pleasure to answer. My interest in the Golem can be traced back to a visit 5 years ago to the Library of Congregation Beth Shalom, Oak Park, Michigan. I was wrong. It's in Oak Park, not West Bloomfield. Librarian Eleanor Smith, to whom I shall always be indebted, showed me an old copy of the Golem, Legends of the Ghetto of Prague, written by Chaim Bloch, and translated into English in 1925, but originally published in German in Vienna in 1919. The binding was broken and sections of the book were loose, but because of my interest in Jewish literature, Mrs. Smith correctly anticipated that I would find these tales delightful. That was how it all got started. As soon as I began reading these wonderful legends, I remembered that I had heard the word Golem many times in my childhood. My mother had used it as an affectionate insult whenever I did something clumsy or stupid. She would call me a laminer Golem, literally a clay golem, freely rendered a clumsy fool. Little did I know then that in Jewish folklore, a famous 16th century rabbi was reputed to have created a man of clay from the banks of the Moldau in Bohemia. Pardon for these words I butcher, but I can't look up everything and read and etc. Now, Czechoslovakia, to protect the Jewish people in times of persecution. The Jewish robot, homunculus, or Frankenstein monster, incapable of speech in many of the early legends, cutter of wood and the hauler of water, clumsy of gait and seemingly dull of wit, was being remembered in Yiddish vernacular as a schlemiel. What a surprise it was to discover that some of the 20th century stories about this remarkable creature portrayed him as sensitive, articulate, and intelligent. The more I probed the legends of the Golem, the more fascinating they became. The enthusiastic reception of my first few lectures in Michigan and Ohio made me realize that there was a large, intelligent audience of lay readers who were as curious about them as I was. Some of the older people, usually of Eastern European origin, wanted to share with me oral legends, even Golem jokes, which they remembered. The younger people knew little or nothing about the Golem and wanted to learn more about its origin and about the many different versions of this legend in modern literature. Fortunately for them and for me, in the 1970s, 4 of the 5 major 20th century book-length works dealing with the Golem became easily available in English translations or new editions. The 5th, America's major contribution to the Golem legend, The Sword of the Golem, is a novel by Abraham Rothberg, published at the end of 1970. Essentially, my plan was to recapture for a modern audience the flavor of these incredible legends, so important in the Jewish cultural past. Throughout this study, I am indebted to various scholars for their pioneering work on the history of the Golem. Foremost among them is the Venerable Gershom Shalem, one of the leading scholars of Jewish mysticism, whose learned commentaries on the development of the legends is indispensable. However, Shalem was not interested in my own specialty, literary analysis, as I investigated the life of Rabbi Judah Loew, the 16th century scholar, allegedly the creator of the Golem of Prague. The most famous of all the Golemim in the 20th century, I found myself indebted to Rabbi Ben Zion Boxer and Frederick Thigh Burger, I'm not sure. But neither of these men undertook the kind of study I have made. To Thieberger, I'll say, I owe the theory of how these legends became transferred from one Eastern European rabbi to another as late as the 18th century. But the analysis of their literary treatment is my own. I see what you're saying. To another scholar, Donald F. Glut, I owe much of my information about the appearance of the Golem legends in popular culture, but I have been able to turn up some information on both a new film and a sequel to the Superman comic book adventure unavailable to him at the time his comprehensive study of the Frankenstein legend went to press. Finally, because the number of other people who have helped me is too long to list, I would like to single out the following: Eleanor Smith for introducing me to the Golem of Prague, Phyllis Young, and my colleague Joseph Prescott for sharing with me their love of and expertise in Yiddish, Charles Samarjan, a student in Professor John Reed's Monster Literature course, who, after hearing my guest lecture, showed me and then allowed me to borrow his rare copies of Superman comics, May Sweet for supplying me with pertinent information on her son's short film Black Golem, Rabbi Emeritus Max Wien, one of the editors of the Midrasha Journal, for his encouragement of my work, my colleagues Professors Harold Goldman and Joseph Gomez for their friendly interest and help in my project, my son Stephen for introducing me to the poetry of Borgia, I believe is how you say his name, the reference librarians at the Purdy Library at Wayne State University for their patience in helping me find obscure information, Gene Owen and Sherwin Carr of the Wayne State University Press for being two of the best editors a writer could ever hope to have, and Mary Gilbert, who typed the original manuscript. My greatest debt is to my wife, Gladys, to whom this book is dedicated for her wisdom, good sense, and understanding. Like the Rebbetzin in the legends, she was willing to put up with the Golem. How long is the introduction? I will save the introduction to the next one since this is already 17 minutes. And we'll close with that. Goodbye, Robs. Goodbye.